Well, good morning, everybody. How we doing? Spectre here for another edition of No BS right here on the 5x5 network here this morning. Got a little bit of news to get to here this morning. Doing a little bit of dig still on the old Texas issue. We're going to get into that here this morning and some of the things that I'm finding here. And hopefully, if you get the opportunity, share the link around. This morning, for whatever reason, the last couple mornings trying to share this out over on the old Gab account, it is not letting me post for whatever reason, so I'm not able to get that out there. Obviously, we are up on Twitch, we're up on YouTube, over on Periscope, DLive, and of course, we got you guys over on the Foxhole app as well. So good to have you guys all aboard here this morning for that. And like I said, this morning we're going to be talking a little bit about Texas and what exactly is going on with the old bankstas, the Goldman Sachs and the like. Yesterday, an interesting article came through by way of Zero Hedge talking about how Goldman Sachs and Bank of America profited immensely at Texas' misery, as it were. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Before I do, I want to remind you, here are some of the episodes you may have missed. I've been talking about Texas now since, I would say probably February 14th was the first episode that you see there on the top left. No BS with Spectre, natural gas through the roof amidst the polar vortex, what was going on there. And I'm going to actually circle back to a couple articles here throughout the broadcast here this morning that I highlighted in that particular episode, and kind of a walking timeline. So you may want to go back and check that out. Walking that forward, we talked about it again in episode 45 of Midnight Rider episode 46, talking about Texas Saga continued, and of course on the 21st here was the last piece that I did, talking about Texas, the fallout. So if you missed any one of those, you can check that out over on the old archives page, either over on Gab TV or over on YouTube. And I'll go ahead and drop that link out there if you guys are not already subscribed over there. And we'll get going here momentarily as we get a few more folks filing in. Let's see here. Let's try that again. There we go. So there you can find the old archives. And again, I'm over on Gab TV as well. Alright, well, that being said, let me jump into a couple of the articles and kind of walk this forward from where I left off previously on the 21st episode. So on the 22nd, and of course, you guys that are down in Texas that are living and breathing and experiencing this stuff, I'm sure hyper aware of what has been going on. But in this particular case, we had the first Texas freeze casualty. Just Energy implodes. Issues going forward. A lot of concerns about that. And the last couple articles I will actually highlight here. This one talking on the 22nd now of natural gas traders begged for cash as Arctic blast paralyzed the Texas energy sector, as well as the board leaders of Texas Power Grid resigns after the blackout outrage. So those two articles I am going to highlight quickly here. Let me get those brought up. And let's do that number and bring that guy up. There we go. So the first one that we'll hit is this guy, and of course it is the natural gas traders begged for cash as the Arctic blast paralyzed the Texas market. Again, that's dating back to the 22nd now. The stories were emerging from veteran gas traders about the events leading up and during one of the worst energy crises in years, as the polar vortex began to dump frigid air into the central U.S. and Texas. Urgent phone calls came over the holiday weekend. Traders of natural gas needed more money and fast, said Bloomberg. As temperatures dove earlier this month and spot prices for natural gas skyrocketed 300-fold, in a matter of days, traders in the physical gas market realized they had a considerable problem developing. Exchanges demanded collateral due to the unprecedented volatility. And before I go forward, if you remember right, back on that first episode that I covered, prices jumped from somewhere around 20 or 25 bucks a therm, somewhere in that neighborhood, clear up to almost $9,000 per therm at that particular time. Readers may recall on February 12th, natural gas prices across the Great Plains erupted as supply froze in pipes due to Arctic conditions produced by the polar vortex split. By February 13th, traders had to come up with collateral by Tuesday. Monday was a market holiday, President's Day, Washington's birthday, or they would be forced out of their positions for massive losses. Desperate for cash to meet margin requirements, some traders turned to the European parent companies that could deliver so-called margin payments on their behalf to the exchanges sooner. The cash showed up in different currencies, but it did the trick, according to Bloomberg. Says, I've been through a lot, the 98 and 99 power spikes in the Midwest, the California crises of 2000 and 2001, said Cody Moore, head of the gas and power trading at Mercuria Energy America. Nothing was as broadly shocking as this week. And here we see the huge tick-up that occurred as a result. Says, with supply frozen in pipes and much of Texas power generation produced by natural gas, the power and gas markets hit record high spot prices last week, while natural gas prices in some locations hit $1,250 per million British thermal units. Wholesale power for delivery hit its $9,000 per megawatt hour price cap as demand exceeded supply, leading to one of the worst controlled blackouts in the nation's history. At one point, Bloomberg calculated that up to 15 million Texans plunged into darkness during the winter blast. And of course, there were winners and losers in the energy space during this entire fiasco. Jerry Jones, a billionaire owner of the Dallas Cowboys, was able to sell natural gas for extraordinary high premiums. One of the losers, Atmos Energy Corp., a top supplier of gas in the U.S., is in the process of raising cash after it committed to securing $3.5 billion worth of natural gas during the chaos. Ahead of the big freeze, natural gas trader Paul Phillips of Denver-based Uplift Energy, who also advises gas producers, told clients to prepare. We wrote a very similar note titled, Overwhelming Signal, Major Winter Storm Threats for Millions of Americans Within the Next 5 Days. It says, one energy trader said, we've officially hit the holy effing shit levels here. This came as spot prices at the Oniok delivery hub in Oklahoma went from $9 on February 10th to $60 on February 10th, or February 11th rather, to $500 on February 12th. But the spot gas prices spikes now being seen were triggering truly outsized demands. According to one trader, a small market participant with a margin requirement of $100K saw that balloon to $1 million. Larger companies had to find tens of millions of dollars. Many spot gas traders are conducted via next-day contracts or Intercontinental Exchange, Inc., which boosted its margin requirements. After the market closed Friday, stunned traders scrambled to work out how much additional funds they would need to set aside for the following week. Some trading houses were extremely nervous. An executive at one said he worried that some counterparties could go bust and leave his firm with positions to fill on the spot market. Again, out of Bloomberg. And as natural gas supply froze, it became quite clear to ERCOT, Texas' largest power company, that controlled rolling blackouts would begin. Some traders looked to raise more collateral, urgently tapped credit lines, while lenders sprang into action. One bank was able to extend credit facilities by $500 million and have them lock in place when the markets reopened, according to a person working there. Other lenders also took similar action, according to other people with knowledge of the situation. Nobody wanted to trade a liquidity event, so they stepped up, one banker said, again, out of Bloomberg. Says as markets reopened on February 16th, natural gas prices shot through the roof as weather conditions deteriorated in central U.S. and Texas. Another winter storm resulted in more weather chaos for the state. At one point, Oniok spot prices on Wednesday topped $12.50, while power prices in Texas exceeded the $9,000 per megawatt hour price cap. So, That being said, let's flash over to the other article here. It says board leaders of Texas Power Grid resign after the blackout outrage, and rightfully so. The chair of Texas Power Grid operator and 4 other board members have resigned in the wake of the widespread outrage resulting from the energy crisis that crippled the state's electrical system. According to a filing by the PUC of Texas, Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT, of Texas, Chair Sally Talberg resigned along with Vice President Peter Crampton and board members Raymond Hepper, Terry Bolger, Vanessa and Anesida Para, and in their resignation letter, the member cited recent concerns raised about out-of-state board leadership at the grid operator. To allow state leaders a free hand with future direction and to eliminate distractions, we are resigning from the board effective after our urgent board teleconference meeting adjourns on Wednesday, February 24th, 2021. And of course, those that recall, ERCOT was right dead center in the mix of this. And of course, I think this article may have been updated to show that most of that board actually did indeed resign. Here we see the letter out of ERCOT dated the 23rd of February. Dear ERCOT board members, we want to acknowledge the pain and suffering of Texans during this past week. Our hearts go out to all Texans who have had to go without electricity, heat, and water during frigid temperatures and continue to face the tragic consequences of this emergency. We have noted recent conditions about out-of-state board leadership at ERCOT. To allow state leaders a free hand with future direction and to eliminate distractions, we are resigning from the board effective after our urgent board teleconference meeting adjourns on Wednesday, February 24th, 2021. Before we step aside, we are beginning the process of reviewing this extreme cold weather event and resulting power crisis. With the right follow-through, Texas can lead the nation in investing in infrastructure and emergency preparedness to withstand the effects of severe weather events, whether in the form of flooding, drought, extreme temperatures, or hurricanes. We want what is best for ERCOT and Texas. We want to thank Bill Magnus and his entire staff for their hard work and dedication. The organization is filled with highly specialized, dedicated professionals who bring decades of experience to Texas. We have only one thing to ask those of you who remain on the board. Please continue to recognize the fine people at ERCOT and what they do for Texas every day. Thank you for your leadership and continuing service on the board and the opportunity to serve Texas. Respectfully, here we see Sally Talberg, Peter Crampton, Raymond Hepper, Terry Bolger, etc. The resignations come as the Texas grid operator ERCOT and state regulators scramble to contain the catastrophic fallout from last week's blackouts that left millions of homes without heat and light during a severe cold snap. The resignations also come after Texas Governor Greg Abbott last week called for ERCOT leadership, including board members, to step down, and one day after the mother of an 11-year-old Texas boy who died during the power outage sued ERCOT and Entergy. We look forward to working with Texas legislature, and we thank the outgoing board members for their service, ERCOT spokesperson Leslie Sopko said in a statement. Craig Ivey also submitted a letter to withdraw his petition for approval as an unaffiliated director, citing concerns stakeholders recently expressed of having out-of-state directors. So there you have it in that regard. Now, let me swing this back over here real quick. Get this brought up. All right, let's do that. All right, so we left off there. Let's flash into the next set here. So flash forward to the 23rd still. We had the variable rate electricity plans under scrutiny after Texas Power hit whatever it did there. This is one Texas resident was slapped with a multi-$1,000 power bill. She said, "I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to do. Should I take from my 401k? Should I get a loan?" And of course, that was as a result of many folks not getting northwards of $7,000, $10,000, $14,000, $17,000 electric bills, by the way, for power that they did not consume during that period. Over to the 25th, we had a couple more articles. Texas grid operator warns of defaults as credit crisis develops. The defaults are possible, and some have already happened. We're going to touch upon that. And then Luongo had this. It says, the greening of the grid froze Texas. Politics is the killer here, not the free markets. So those are the two I'm going to highlight here next. We'll get into that. Switch that back over. There we go. All right. So that being said, the Texas grid operator warns of the defaults as the credit crisis develops. Again, this on the 25th, walking this forward. The Texas energy crisis has morphed from a power grid failure to a humanitarian emergency to a credit crisis as billions of dollars in power bills come due. According to Financial Times, electricity retailers, municipal utilities, and power generation companies were purchasing wholesale energy during the crisis when rates surged to a cap of $9,000 a megawatt hour last week. Oh, a whopping $50 billion. Yeah, just some chump change in that to throw around. And here we see the extreme volatility in that took place for wholesale power prices during that period. Says ERCOT, the state grids operator, warns that some market participants have yet to post collateral to cover some of the bills as defaults begin. Kenan Ogelman, ERCOT's Vice President of Commercial Operations, said market participants who buy power from them have to post collateral as a down payment on energy purchases. He said some entities have failed to deliver it. Defaults are possible, and some have already happened, Ogelman warned. Due to surging energy prices last week and the week before, collateral requirements jumped for power buyers. At the beginning of February, ERCOT held around $600 million in total collateral. On Wednesday, Exelon Corporation posted $1.4 billion of collateral with the Texas Power Company. Exelon said it might record losses between $560 to $710 million due to power rate volatility when 3 of its gas-generating plants went offline. Ogelman said collateral requirements would peak by the end of the week and add financial stress to market participants. The Public Utility Commission of Texas ordered the grid operator on Monday to use discretion on settlements, collateral obligations, and payments. Ogelman said there are consequences for halting payments that would cascade into problems for energy futures markets operated by Intercontinental Exchange. Says there are consequences to any pause, Ogelman said. I think it's important to understand that there's a train of dominoes, essentially, that flow through ERCOT and into other markets. Sean Taylor, ERCOT Chief Financial Officer, said there are several billions of dollars of invoices outstanding. Then it's a matter of how much of those get paid relative to the collateral we have. Taylor warned the next couple of days will really determine where we stand. To cover shortfalls from defaulting parties, the nonprofit had begun to tap an almost $1 billion fund supported by electric transmission contracts, Taylor said. Additional stress is developing for individual customers, such as households or companies, who are socked with huge power bills. Residential customers who had variable rate electricity plans experienced steep increases in their monthly bills. One customer's bill went from $660 on average to more than $17,000 this month. And earlier this week, it appears the first casualty of the Texas power grid crisis is Just Energy, who warned the financial impact of the weather event on the company, once known, could be materially adverse to the company's liquidity and its ability to continue as a going concern. In other words, it's going belly up. That being said, let's flash into the next one, and that's out of Tom Luongo, who always has some very thoughtful articles. And of course, the greening of the grid froze Texas. It says polar winds scream out of Canada in seeming revenge for Joe Biden canceling the Keystone XL pipeline. Texas power grid collapsed as temperatures more likely in Sioux Falls than San Antonio roared, in plunging more than 4 million people into darkness and without heat. How can this have possibly happened in a place whose entire cultural identity revolves around producing energy? Simple. Texas deregulated energy markets went green over the past decade. In the past 10 years, according to the EIA, Texas retired more than 5,000 megawatts of coal-supplied power while spinning up more than that in windmills. Wind produces the marginal, or last, megawatt in Texas. In this case, they last 17%. Nuclear provides the first megawatt, less than 10%. Natural gas provides most of the megawatts. Now, one would think in a world which is getting hotter that putting windmills and solar panels would be a good idea. Well, I'm sure that's what the CEOs of all of these energy providers across Texas thought as well. And our government at every level incentivized this. The cultural zeitgeist of sustainability and renewables overrode, as it always does, common sense. Because at the heart of this problem is, bluntly, the planet isn't warming. It hasn't warmed net on net for the nearly 20 years. Texas' electricity market has been deregulated. In fact, when one steps back from the entire CO2-induced climate change hysteria and sees it for what it is, a giant money laundering operation through taxes, we have been preparing for the wrong climate catastrophe for more than a generation. More on that in a minute. Because the intense cold power demands for electric heat in Texas spiked well above levels needed for air conditioning in their normally brutal summers. Why? Because those wind turbines which produce the marginal megawatt froze. Even worse, because most of Texas' power actually comes from its abundant production of natural gas, and no one thought to consult the folks in Canada or North Dakota, apparently, major parts of the gas pipeline infrastructure which delivers the gas to the power plants froze as well. So, no gas, no power. No wind, no power. Even with wind, no power. And it says on top of that, one of the 2 reactors at the South Texas Nuclear Power Station went down this week, adding to the state's power woes. The result was the price for electricity spiking to unheard of numbers that make Bitcoin look like a stablecoin in comparison. From under $100 per megawatt hour to the limit, as defined by Texas Regulatory Board ERCOT, of $9,000 per megawatt hour. Anti-free market types will chime in and decry the evils of deregulation and protecting the little guy from price gougers. Commies will scream that it wasn't the frozen windmill's fault or the lack of sunlight. What it will be blamed on the other hand, is the evils of capitalism, because that's what always happens when even a somewhat deregulated market like that of electricity in Texas is hit with a Six Sigma outlier event, like Dallas dealing with a high of 9 degrees F in mid-February. It doesn't matter if we socialize the costs or not. The bills for the power used this week in Texas have to be paid. Those costs weren't necessarily caused by deregulation. The extremity of the situation was caused by something far more pernicious than price gouging. Bad planning because of bad information. CO2-induced global warming theory is, simply put, an illusion. The emotions surrounding it, along with the economic incentives created through government edict, are real. The planetary and solar physics have far more predictive and explanatory power than the endless data fudging associated with man's hockey stick graph and Al Gore's stupid movie. The weather event which engulfed the center of the U.S. and is moving east, which pushed the jet stream to the extreme south, cannot be explained by aggregate CO2 concentrations, but rather the interactions between fluctuations in the solar wind and Earth's rapidly weakening magnetic field. And I guess I'll pause there, because if you joined me for the broadcast the other day and talking about the old earth a-shaking with the New Zealand and Iceland earthquakes, you'll note that I highlighted a couple of very interesting articles talking about some very interesting hurricanes, as it were, magnetic hurricanes occurring around the top of the North Pole, as well as what is going on with the grand solar minimum and that we are experiencing presently. And of course, carrying on here, it says a strong solar wind event which pushes on the magnetic field alters the flow of the jet stream, bringing strong polar winds farther south than thought possible by the builders of Texas energy grid. And geological and solar system timescales, 50 or 60 years of data, are irrelevant. It doesn't matter that it hasn't been this cold in Texas for 100 years, when the conditions which cause this event occur every few thousand. You can't plan for that unless you are looking at the right data with the right set of eyes. For decades, the effects of solar physics on our planet have been suppressed in pursuit of the CO2 narrative enshrined at the heights of our political power structures at a global level. They do this, in my opinion, to further their political power and advance an agenda of control rather than one of freedom and inquiry. Because of this, we have diverted trillions in useful capital into critical infrastructure projects which fail when we need them most because their bad information crowded out better information. It has pushed back the promise of home power generation for a generation. This, to me, is real energy freedom. It looked promising back when I built my house in 2003. It is still just a dream outside of solar. The power companies and local governments will not give up that control. It is a key to their tax collection. The rallying cry of Joe Biden, when he can read it clearly off the teleprompter, is trust the science. But science isn't consensus any more than chocolate is vanilla. Science in our hyper-politicized world is just that, political. Because if we listen to the science, we would have given up on global warming decades ago. The history of science is the scientists acting as gatekeepers of the dominant political system. New knowledge, which threatens the existing power structure, is suppressed. Its advocates branded heretics, slowing the adoption of new paradigms of thought for generations. That's where we are today in climate science. The global warming story collapsed. Now it's climate change. And even that is dubious as the solar physics story gains incontrovertible traction. And remember, what we wanted was less pollution. What we got was frozen wind turbines and solar farms in Germany covered in ice. And of course, I did highlight that here on a broadcast here, I think probably a couple weeks ago, that old Angela Merkel is suffering the same fate over there. Nonetheless, says even the IPCC will finally add some solar particle forcing data, the kind which pushed the jet stream down to freeze Texas, into their data set in 2022. This is the first major step, officially, towards ending this insanity. Reality is reasserting itself with a vengeance in this space, and yet the Biden administration is full steam ahead with the Green New Deal. And you might as well add AOC right on top of that list as well. And of course, our now infamous climate czar, Mr. John Kerry. The sad truth is that if none of us had ever listened to the renewable energy hysteria and pushed for proper deregulation of energy markets, things would be better today. If Texas had left those coal plants running and built a few more nuclear reactors, it wouldn't be freezing today. And again, to pause, keep in mind under 44, well, sure, you can build that coal plant. The problem is, it's just going to cost you through the nose to be able to build it. We'll stick so many regulations on top of that thing, it'll be so cost prohibitive that there's no way you can possibly build yet another coal plant because fossil fuels are dirty. Says if we'd gotten the government out of energy regulation market altogether and allowed a proper free market in it with a properly decentralized grid, we would be far closer to the socialist dream of ending price gouging during weather crises. But because of government's insatiable need to control the real means of production, energy, communications, travel, and education, we limp along with a hodgepodge grid just waiting for the next catastrophe. And so, again, a fairly well thought out penned article, as usual, by old Tom Luongo there. So let's head back over to the rest of it here. And we'll jump over there. There we go. There we go. Let's transition that back over. There we go. All right, so now, on top of that, Texas desperate for out-of-state plumbers and broken water pipes. Obviously, we saw elements of that because obviously if there's no electricity, there's no heat. People probably aren't used to that. Had a lot of burst pipes, so obviously a lot of copper is going to be in need. And not necessarily at the best time because commodity prices, if you've been paying attention to that, lumber, copper, steel, all of it is on the rise. On to March 1st now, credit crisis spreads as largest Texas power co-op files for bankruptcy. We're going to hit that one. As well as Texas AG hits electricity provider Griddy for deceptive practices. So that's where we'll jump back in here. All right, let me see here. Let's turn that back on. There we go. So, jumping back across. So, credit crisis spreads as largest Texas power co-op files for bankruptcy. The Arctic blast and severe winter storms that pounded Texas weeks ago have claimed another victim as the credit crisis widens. Texas' largest power cooperative filed for bankruptcy protection in federal court in Houston Monday, citing a $1.8 billion bill from the state's grid operator ERCOT, according to Reuters. According to court docs, Brazos Electric Power Cooperative, the largest generation and transmission co-op in the Lone Star State, filed for Chapter 11 in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of Texas. The company said it could not pay a $1.8 billion bill from ERCOT stemming from a severe cold snap last month. Brazos and other utility companies who have committed to providing power to the grid were unable to during the mid-February crisis that left up to 4 million customers without power. This meant utilities had to purchase replacement power at extremely high rates, and some of these extra costs were passed on to customers. Clifton Carney, executive vice president of Brazos, said in the filing that the magnitude of the charges could not have been reasonably anticipated or modeled, and surpassed Brazos' highest liquidity levels in years. On February 25th, Brazos told ERCOT that wouldn't be able to pay what was owed, leaving the company with no choice but to file for bankruptcy. Brazos has assets and liabilities between $1 billion and $10 billion. Brazos Electric suddenly finds itself caught in a liquidity trap that it cannot solve with its current balance sheet, Carney said in the filing. Our readers may recall, we were one of the first to uncover the mind-blowing power bills some Texans were slapped with. Some people who opted into variable power bills were charged as much as $17,000 for power. We even did the math and said it would cost $900 to charge a Tesla in Texas during the energy crisis. And that's where we'll leave that, obviously, again, highlighting the ridiculousness of all this climate BS and what we just now experienced. It should be plain obvious to folks. And if you cannot see this, open your eyes. Keep buying those electric cars, folks, because what's going to happen when the day comes when you lose power? Are you going to be able to get down to your local convenience store to get a little bread or water if you can't charge your damn car? I don't think so. So what are you? You're pretty much dead in the water. Hopefully you got a good pair of snowshoes. All right, over to the next one. Texas AG hits electricity provider Griddy for the deceptive practices. Again, this on March 1st now. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton filed a lawsuit against power company Griddy, LLC, for violating the Texas Deceptive Trade Practices Act through false, misleading, and deceptive advertising and marketing practices, according to a statement released by Paxton's office. Griddy passed skyrocketing energy costs to customers with little to no warning, resulting in consumers paying hundreds or even thousands of dollars each day for electricity, the statement said. Griddy misled Texans and signed them up for services which, in a time of crisis, resulted in individual Texans each losing thousands of dollars. As Texans struggled to survive this winter storm, Griddy made this suffering even worse as it debited outrageous amounts each day. As the first lawsuit filed by my office to confront the outrageous failure of power companies, I will hold Griddy accountable for their escalation of this winter storm disaster, said Paxton. My office will not allow Texans to be deceived or exploited by unlawful behavior and deceptive business practices. And of course, here is the lawsuit in that was filed. The state of Texas versus Griddy Energy LLC, Griddy Holdings LLC. The key piece here says, in this action, the state alleges that defendants engaged in false, misleading, and deceptive acts and practices in violation of Section 17.46 of the Texas Deceptive Trade Practices Consumer Protection Act. Griddy, which debuted in 2017, allowed people to opt into variable rate electricity plans, essentially paying wholesale prices for electricity instead of a fixed rate. But when the February winter freeze and multiple storms resulted in power rates to skyrocket, some Texans were slapped with thousands of dollars of energy bills. The lawsuit seeks relief from Griddy to ensure that the Texans it serves will receive truthful and accurate energy service in the future, and to have the court order refunds from available sources, the statement concluded. Paxton's lawsuit was inevitable, as we noted last week. Variable rate electricity plans would come under intense scrutiny. The good news is that most Texans don't have variable plans, according to Catherine Webking, a partner at Austin-based law firm Scott, Douglas, and McConaughey. Unfortunately, when energy demand is high, the wholesale price of power can be quite expensive. Certainly, scrutiny is building across multiple state governments about how some energy companies charge their customers. One Texas resident was slapped with a multi-thousand-dollar power bill, and she said, "I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to do. Should I take from my 401k? Should I get a loan?" Maybe customers with a variable rate plan should get into the game of hedging, or perhaps for starters, at least keep an eye on power rates. So yes, unfortunately, we'll have to see how this pans out, and I do feel for the folks in that who obviously get slapped with those bills who are unawares, but it is a bit of a risk in that you take on. Perhaps those risks were not communicated by the folks at Griddy. All right, that being said, let's get into the next one here. Let's bounce that through. There we go. All right, back over to this now. So now, the crux of the matter. Yesterday, we get this piece out of Zero Hedge as well. It says more power defaults as Texas energy crisis widens. ERCOT releases more of the same there. We're going to see more of the folks in that probably default. And of course, like I said yesterday, Goldman, Bank of America made hundreds of millions from Texas blackouts. And that's going to be the crux of today's broadcast. So that being said, let's jump into those. I'll get that switched up here. Back over we go. All right, there we go. So that being said, as the power defaults, Texas energy crisis widens, ERCOT releases the short list, and we just cited one example there. We're starting to get a better understanding of the Texas credit crisis involving power companies operating on the state's power grid following the Arctic blast and severe winter storms that pounded the area last month, resulting in wholesale electricity prices soaring to more than $9,000 a megawatt hour. Earlier this week, court documents showed Brazos Electric Power Cooperative, the largest generation and transmission co-op in the Lone Star State, filed for Chapter 11 in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of Texas. The company said it could not pay a $1.8 billion bill to the state's grid operator ERCOT. Now, power retailer Entrust Energy, Inc. is the second electricity seller barred from Texas power market for failing to make payments, said Bloomberg. Entrust is short $234 million in payments to generators and others. ERCOT on Wednesday outlined electricity providers who are short $2.217 billion in payments. And here are the culprits. Brazos, that we already talked about, filing for bankruptcy at about $1.8 billion. Here we see Entrust with about $234 million-ish. Hanwha Energy probably be the next on the list, about $44 million. Rayburn Electric, Griddy, of course, the lawsuit already being filed against them. Luminar Energy, GB Power, MQE, Energy Monger, Bulb, City of Garland, Wolverine Trading, Volt Electricity Provider, Eagles View Partners, Grid Plus Texas, etc., totaling up to the $2.2 billion in that figure that we just saw. Brazos, who tops the list, said in a filing that the magnitude of the changes could not have been reasonably anticipated or modeled and surpassed its highest liquidity levels in years. The company finds itself caught in a liquidity trap that it cannot solve with its current balance sheet. It wasn't just power companies slapped with massive power bills. Customers also had bills that were considerably high. Our readers may recall we were one of the first to uncover the mind-blowing power bills some Texans were slapped with. Some people who opted into variable power bills were charged as much as $17,000 for power. We even did that math and said it would cost $900 to charge a Tesla in Texas during the energy crisis. Kenan Ogelman, ERCOT's VP of Commercial Operations, was right days ago when he warned about defaults are possible. Yes, Ogelman, defaults are possible, and that's what we're seeing today. The Texas credit crisis is not over. So again, more to unfold, I'm sure, in the coming days. That being said, that takes us into yesterday's article. Goldman, Bank of America made the hundreds of millions from the Texas blackouts. And it says, who needs Enron when you have taxpayer-backed banks? I use air quotes, obviously. Because at this day and age, these guys are too big to fail, right? Whereas 20 years ago, it was Enron that made billions from the California electricity crisis, which it caused, a scandal which culminated with Enron's scandalous and convoluted bankruptcy. This time, it is pristine banks such as Goldman and Bank of America that made hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue as tens of millions of Texans were stuck in the dark. According to the Financial Times, in the days when the Texas grid failed during last month's polar vortex blast, and which sent electricity prices to staggering levels, Bank of America made hundreds of millions of dollars in trading revenue, highlighting the upside for Wall Street for mayhem that knocked out power and heat across the state, industry executives and traders said. The bank's Houston-based energy trading group, which is part of Bank of America's FICC division, fixed income, division that made revenues of $1.7 billion in the fourth quarter, had electricity contracts that soared in value when wholesale Texas power prices rose 10,000% to a cap of $9,000 a megawatt hour the third week of February, the Financial Times reports. The story is familiar to our readers. While the record prices were ordered by the Texas utility regulator in an attempt to bring more generation into service, this plan imploded when almost half the state's capacity fell offline as wind farms froze over starting a catastrophic chain reaction which led to widespread blackouts and blocked supplies of natural gas and frozen coal pipes. The blackouts lasted days, leaving millions in the dark. Like numerous other power merchants, Bank of America takes part in the Texas energy market by trading power and gas and selling products that enable generators and other asset owners to hedge against fluctuating prices. That activity left Bank of America with an inventory of power contracts that surged in value during the blackouts. The volatility of the energy markets has heightened the value of risk management, the bank's website says, perhaps in anticipation of the outrage that will follow the realization that a handful of banks made huge windfalls as the population froze, in some cases to death. To ease its conscience and preempting the angry populist chants in front of its Texas office, the bank pledged $1.1 million, or a tiny fraction of its power revenues, to charities to provide shelter, water, food, and other essentials after the weather catastrophe. From the Rio Grande Valley to the Panhandle, this winter storm affected the entire state, including our 19,000 employees in Texas, and for many, the recovery is just beginning, Nikki Graham, the bank's Austin market president, said in a statement last month. While Bank of America declined to comment on the Financial Times on how much its energy trading generated during the Texas blackouts, it stated revenues related to this activity will be offset by losses and reduced revenues related to investments in wind and other alternative power suppliers in Texas and other affected markets. And in what appears to be a distressed asset grab to further entrench itself in the space, Bank of America was the lead bank on a $480 million line of credit to Brazos Electric Power Cooperative. Very interesting how that works. A nice little handshake deal that they have behind the scenes, right? The generation and transmission company, which, as we reported on Monday, filed for bankruptcy protection this week because it was unable to pay for power purchases racked up during the storm. While most banks have been understandably tight-lipped about their trading activities during the longest spell of cold weather ever to test the Texas grid, and certainly their profits, one exception is Australia's Macquarie, which also has a Houston-based energy business, and which reported a Aussie 300 million, US $234 million gain related to natural gas trading, lifting annual group profit by 5 to 10%. So far, we're only hearing from the losers, and furthermore, we're only hearing what the losers have chosen to tell us, said Ross Baldick, an emeritus professor of engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. To be sure, most other banks likely generated significant revenues during Texas' historic woes, since Bank of America has a smaller energy trading business than most of its peers. Citigroup was the fourth largest seller of U.S. wholesale power in the third quarter of 2020, while Morgan Stanley was 15th according to the government data compiled by S&P Global Platts. Bank of America is not in the top 20. One other bank, which we do know made substantial profits from the Texas turmoil, is, who else? Goldman Sachs. The bank, which recently was found criminally guilty for its involvement in the biggest sovereign corruption scandal in history, when it bilked billions from Malaysia's sovereign wealth fund, could stand to gain more than $200 million from the physical sale of power and natural gas and from financial hedges after spot prices surged across much of the U.S., according to Bloomberg. Say it ain't so, old Goldman Sachs. The polar vortex drove volatility in energy markets, and as market maker and liquidity provider, we are positioned to help our clients manage their risks in that challenging environment, Maeve Duvali, a Goldman Sachs spokeswoman, said in a statement. Some of Goldman's gains resulted from hedges, a routine part of risk management on Wall Street and across corporate America. Hedges are typically supposed to blunt losses in the event the prices swing unexpectedly. The protection can become highly profitable when rare events occur. But, as in the case of Bank of America, those gains, whether from hedges or prop trades, may prove elusive given the increasingly political fallout from the Texas crisis, which has tipped energy companies into bankruptcy, triggering legal challenges and prompting government intervention. Indeed, as the Financial Times adds, profits may well be diminished as Texas officials ponder retroactively reducing prices for some of the $50 billion in electricity sales as executed during the blackouts. Morgan Stanley also stands to reap a revenue bonanza from the Texas freeze, its gains coming in just below those of Goldman at under $200 million. Pipeline Operations Energy Transfer LP and Oniak Inc. also said they gained. The big question now is how much of these revenues will actually result in cash getting wired. That's because said cash will depend on what happens to the gas suppliers, power generators, utility customers, and traders who are stung by the soaring energy prices. Some are facing default, others are going bankrupt, according to Bloomberg, and state lawmakers are looking into forgiving some payments for consumers altogether. Several traders describe the potential for a daisy chain in which payments aren't made to sellers in one market, affecting payments elsewhere, and it was a surprise to some that Macquarie updated its forecast so soon. People are waiting for checks that aren't coming, said Evan Caron, Chief Strategy Officer of energy technology firm ClearTrace. The final outcome, according to Bloomberg, depends on part in developments in places such as Texas. That markets manager, ERCOT, or the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, is grappling with a $2.5 billion shortfall as more than a dozen companies face default. In a further complication, an independent monitor told state regulators that ERCOT incorrectly priced electricity during the emergency, resulting in $16 billion in overcharges. If that were reversed, the adjustment would cut profits expected by some of the market's biggest winners. Meanwhile, in the State House, discussion of a potential bailout or other intervention continues. All right. Well, that being said, let's head back across to the rest of it here. And bring that back. There we go. So now, it begs the question with old Goldman here. Well, something interesting happened. And we have to go back into the mid parts of January before all of this blew up. And I highlight an interesting map here, and it was pure luck that I stumbled on this particular map because as I pulled the graphic in, just to kind of highlight the dip in the jet stream, you can kind of see by the discolored portion down through the middle part of the country and parts of Canada here, all the way down into Texas. This particular forecast out of AER was for February 8th through February 14th, or from February 14th to the 18th rather. which is very interesting given the timing of said article. And oil price head Goldman Sachs warns of bullish perfect storm for natural gas. That's a very, very interesting headline, don't you think? Now, how in the world would Goldman Sachs know of a perfect storm? Well, and as luck would have it, like I said, this particular graphic that I found to kind of highlight this, and chasing back through their website to find the actual time frame in question here, what is AER? Well, it just so happens that AER, a Verisk business, is called Atmospheric and Environmental Research. And guess what they do? Well, they're a bunch of scientists and engineers who help governments and businesses solve the world's biggest climate issues. Sounds okay. We prepare agencies like NOAA, NASA, and the Department of Defense, along with large insurance, investment, and energy companies, to anticipate, manage, react to, and profit from weather and climate-related risk. Whoa, that's very, very interesting. And like I said, it was just happenstance that I stumbled upon this. AER. So, various anons, folks, chat, wherever, maybe it's time to do a little bit of a dig on who AER is and just perhaps what they knew as well. So let's break this oil price article down here real quick, because this is kind of interesting, again, dating back to the middle part of January now. Flash over back to that. There we go. Alright, so oil price had this to say. It was later picked up by Zero Hedge as well. Goldman Sachs warns of bullish perfect storm for natural gas. And again, this dating back to January 14th. Goldman Sachs has flipped on their bearish natural gas stance to a bullish one. Goldman's Samantha Dart's reasoning behind the view shift is due to a combination of factors, including supply disruptions, shipping delays, and strong LNG demand, liquid natural gas, supported by heavy nuclear maintenance in Japan and a cold start of the year in Northeast Asia, have significantly tightened the LNG market. And before I go too much further, I will highlight that around the same time, this polar vortex business also caused much of the same sort of calamity over in the Asian side of the world, Japan and over on that side of the globe. So yes, it does focus a little bit more so on that. I just find that the timing and the headlines seems very, very, very suspect. The prices of the supercooled fuel in especially Asia have reached astronomical heights in recent days. The most critical LNG markets are in Asia and Europe, which come as a polar vortex split that has dumped Arctic air in both regions, boosting natural gas prices. Goldman points out LNG Asian benchmark JKM has jumped to a fresh all-time high of 32 million BTU today as the market struggled to ration demand while supply takes weeks to move incremental Atlantic Basin supply into Asia. While LNG prices are soaring in Asia, cold weather in Europe has led to the Dutch Tidal Transfer Facility, TTF, the physical short-term gas and gas futures contract to soar 29% higher to 943 per metric BTU in the last 2 days. Goldman suggests that even deeper than expected drop in Northwest European LNG deliveries, we now see European balances even tighter. Colder than average temperatures have provided significant support for European natural gas demand. TTF prices forecast skewed to the upside, Goldman said, adding that it's due to weather-driven tightness realized thus far. We see risks to our revised TTF price forecast skewed to the upside as, given the LNG and weather-driven tightness realized thus far, we believe that even a warm turn to the weather would not be enough to take this year's storage path towards a capacity breach. This effectively eliminates the risk that TTF may need to sell off this winter to once again close the U.S. LNG export arb. Hence, with warm weather risks less relevant, we update our weather scenario analysis to focus on colder than average scenarios only. Importantly, our previous iteration of this analysis had already shown the explosive potential for TTF prices, again that out of Goldman. Colder weather in Europe has also resulted in Spanish natural gas prices hitting a record high. On Monday, British wholesale gas prices surged to their highest level since December 2018, or about a 2-year high due to colder weather. And here we see some of the weather patterns in that over Europe at that particular time. Forecast temperature deviations for Europe show much of the continent will continue experiencing colder than average temperatures for the month. And colder weather in Europe has driven power prices to record highs. About 40% of the electricity consumed in the continent comes from fossil fuels, such as natural gas. In the UK, day ahead, 5 to 6 p.m., electricity prices just zoomed to an all-time high, many, but really many times above normal auction levels. See 2010 to 2021 charts below. And they suffered much the same fate, consequently, as what Texas just experienced. While natural gas prices are surging, in Asia and Europe, U.S. LNG export arbitrage continues to widen. Goldman believes this provides no incremental tightening of U.S. gas balances, as we already expected U.S. liquefaction facilities to operate near capacity throughout the year. Supposedly, the smartest people in the room also believe there will be significant upside to NYMEX gas prices this summer to help correct what we see as a 2.5 BCFD imbalance in the market through October 21st. Accordingly, we maintain our 3.325 metric BTU 2021 summer gas price forecast versus forwards at 280. And that surging cost could be coming home soon. As BAMWX's Hints has pointed out, high-impact cold and storminess across the eastern U.S. and Canada is next. Very, very interesting. So again, very interesting timing. Again, just highlighting the fact of the headline is enough to give one pause, I would think. That being said, let's jump back across yet again. Again, here you see the map as I just highlighted, AER, talking about that. So, it begs the question, as I said. Alright, Goldman Sachs. That's the article that I highlight at the top here. Now, if you go back to what I highlighted at the very beginning, the very first broadcast I did on this back on February 14th, I had a pair of interesting articles, one of which was out of Breitbart. Under Trump, America becomes a net exporter of natural gas and crude. And the date on that was October 25th of 2020, right down there. The next article, U.S. natural gas output and demand to decline in 2020 and 2021, according to the EIA. And that was an article out of Sputnik on December 8th. So, from October 25th to December 8th, okay, we're at a surplus, we're a net exporter, all is good, demand looks like it's going to be low based on forecasts. Then, boom, all of a sudden, January 14th rolls along. Goldman says, hey, you know what? We're warning of a bullish perfect storm for natural gas. So, it begs the question, what did Goldman Sachs know, and when did they know it? What exactly happened between December 8th and January 14th that would lead them to believe that, hey, all of a sudden, you know what? This prediction that the EIA threw out, we're going to throw that out the window. We're going to see this little polar vortex thing come about, and we better get ahead of this, adjust our forecasts. We might need to adjust our hedges a little bit here on the backside of this thing so we profit regardless, right? And perhaps we'll make bank on this. We'll see how it fares, right? Just some questions in that I have. And of course, the fallout. So in the last several days, we've seen a number of execs and that decide to jump ship from Goldman Sachs. On the 28th, Marcus Mulling, head of Goldman's customer bank, leaving for Walmart. On the March 1st, we got Goldman Exodus Accelerates, head of asset management, suddenly quits. There we see Eric Lane, asset management co-head. And last but not least, here on the 2nd, which I'll touch upon here momentarily, what's going on at Goldman? Another senior exec just jumped ship. What in the world? So let's dive into that guy. Alright. So last but not least on the morning, what's going on at Goldman? Another senior exec just jumped ship. In the last few days, Goldman Sachs has lost two very senior executives from the investment bank's two biggest bets on the future, consumer finance, we had Marcus that I just highlighted, and wealth management, and now the behemoth's chief lawyer is abandoning ship. Leaving, many ask, what is going on at Goldman? Sunday saw Omar Ismail, the head of Goldman's consumer-facing commercial bank, Marcus, jump ship to join Walmart, and David Stark, one of Ismail's top lieutenants at Goldman, will join him in the new venture. Monday saw Eric Lane, the co-head of Goldman's $8 billion asset management business, make a sudden exit from the firm to join Tiger Global. And now Tuesday, Karen Seymour, Goldman's general counsel, is exiting the bank. Seymour played a crucial role in helping the bank settle criminal probes in the 1MDB scandal last year, where Goldman forked over about $5 billion in penalties, while avoiding any sanctions that would hobble its operations. Seymour is perhaps best known for winning an obstruction of justice conviction against Martha Stewart in 2004, and when she was with U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. She joined Goldman Sachs from Sullivan & Cromwell LLP, where she also started her career in 1987. One can't help but wonder if there is much more turbulence below the Goldman Sachs surface than the bank's impressive recent earnings would suggest. And that's exactly so, and why I will leave it on this screen here. Again, were any of these Goldman Sachs execs involved? Texas AG Paxton, are you listening? Okay? On the one hand, yes, it's great to go after ERCOT and some of these folks like Gritty and everybody else. But is it a misguided look at where things need to be pointed here? Perhaps maybe we need to look at the speculative market and, again, dating back to January via headlines here. What was known and by whom at what time? And how many others were privy to that? Were any Texas legislators or perhaps AGs or governors or lieutenant governors in Texas also privy, perhaps? I don't know. To me, I'd think that would be worth a look. So, nonetheless, folks, that is where I'm going to leave it here this morning. I thought it was very, very interesting and very telling to find some of this here. Don't know where the story ends. We'll try and stay on top of it here. Obviously, now over 4 episodes deep into this deal here, we've gathered quite a bit of information, and that's just looking at one particular source, mainly Zero Hedge, that has encapsulated a lot of this. My archives net actually run fairly deep, and you can see over time that back in 2019, Texas suffered a very similar fate back then, not only with the energy prices and things and shortages with summertime, but also the winter prior. And if I look back even further in my archives, I find other examples as well. So perhaps it's time for a giant shakeup in the energy markets and who is handling what, et cetera down there. But that's up to you guys down in Texas to resolve. So again, I want to thank you guys for joining the broadcast here this morning. That's what I've got here as it pertains to Texas and their situation down there. I find it very, very interesting that Goldman Sachs just gets named here in recent days as profiting immensely. Where will this lead? I can't say, but let's hope that your legislators and folks down in Texas do the right thing and put pressure on them, folks, if you're down that way. Make sure that they uncover every rock and look at every single thing pertaining to it. So that's going to do it for the broadcast here this morning. Appreciate you guys tuning in, as always, and we'll see you back here shortly on the next one. Take care. God bless, everybody.